A few years ago, an idea for a book called Small Pleasures entered my occasionally busy brain. And it was an idea about a collection of all the things that can give us a great sense of well-being, even though in themselves they might seem slight. So some of the thoughts, if I reflect back, some of the thoughts were things like the sound of rain on a tin roof when you're underneath the shelter, or that delicious smell of tomatoes growing on the vine. You know, when you just brush past a tomato plant and it has its own unique freshness to it. Or climbing into a warm bath after a cold, wet walk. So these were some of the things that I kind of mentally gathered to me that could all have become part of that book. And there were lots and lots of them. And so the idea drifted about, and occasionally I'd add another one to my mental list. I never really wrote anything down about it. It was always just this kind of wafty little thing going on in the back of my head. But I couldn't quite see how the book would look and feel, or how it would come into being. And this was way before I wrote My Darling Girl, so way before I had my first book published. And as you may know, so since then I have published My Darling Girl, and I've also published a book which is more of a kind of self-coaching book called The Heart of Change. And they're wonderful, and I love them, and they're creations. And then over the past few months, that idea, it was kind of connected to that idea of small pleasures. That sort of idea of that book has returned, although this time with much more clarity about the direction that it needed to take. And actually, on paper, you'd look at the two and think, well, they don't seem connected. But for me, inside me, they feel very connected. And the reason being that the whole concept of small pleasures can be seen as tiny gestures of love that we express toward ourselves, even just in the noticing that thing is deeply pleasurable is a way of really connecting with it and feeling all of the benefit that we can from the experience, rather than just letting it rush by us. In a way, I suppose it's like a genuine, true, deep moment of mindfulness and presence. So these, this idea of small pleasures, they can be things that we do that we know will give us a sense of peace or presence or joy or connection or respite, or that simply help us recognize all that is good in our lives, all that we have to be grateful for. And there's a connection here with the Instagram account that I ran throughout lockdown called 21 Beads of Gratitude, where every night I would write 21 things that I was grateful for and post it out on Instagram. And I suppose, actually, even just sort of talking here, the reflection is that too will be part of the inspiration for this, my third book, which is now alive and in the world. But before I sort of come on to talk about that, I just want to talk a little bit about this whole idea of expressing love to ourselves. And often I think it feels a bit sort of esoteric or a bit nebulous or a bit theoretical or a bit abstract, especially when we're not feeling it, especially when we're not in that place where it feels easy to access or easy to connect with. But my reflection here really is that self-love is actually far easier than we might think. And often I think it's about a mindset, as with so many things. So we can often look at others who are expressing self-love and think, oh, well, it's all right for them. They haven't got to deal with all the things that I have to deal with. They haven't got to deal with the stuff of life that makes it difficult to feel self-love or self-compassion. But, you know, the reality is that we've all got stuff going on. We all have those voices in our heads, for a start, those voices that tell us that we're not worthy, or that judge us for being too whatever that thing is, you know, you fill in the blanks, or not enough, da 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 da, you fill in the blank again. And even the Dalai Lama has those voices, you know, the most zen, chilled out, present, mindful human that you know, many of us could think of. You know, even the Dalai Lama has those voices. It's simply that they've learned how to allow those voices to be there and still maintain that sort of deep sense of self-love, self-compassion, which then obviously allows them to be deeply loving and deeply compassionate to others. You know, and even the Buddha had Mara, and, you know, the demon, and Jesus had the devil. You know, I think you look across any great spiritual leader, they will all, you know, in all of their teachings, there will be messages of what they have had to process, contend with, manage, in order to still come into that place of, let's call it enlightenment, for want of a better word. So we all have parts that feel as though they're only there to derail us. You know, no one is exempt. And so it means that we all also have the capacity to come into that place where we're able to practice self-love. And really, I think so much of it is about learning or being willing to learn how we can practice it, how we can even turn our love and attention and affection to those parts that feel as though they're really there to hinder us rather than to help us. And, you know, I've talked about this so many times before, but, you know, it's not in a narcissistic or self-indulgent or self-aggrandizing way, but it's by realizing that the whole of us is worthy of love, because then we can turn that attention to others too and see that the whole of them is worthy of our love. And that's really what living from a place of compassion means. So there's a lovely story, and I think I've shared it here before, but the Buddha even expressed love to Mara, who came to tempt him when he was sat under the Bodhi tree as he was reaching enlightenment, as he was meditating. And Mara tried to tempt him with beautiful women and delicious sweet foods and power and all things that that the Buddha as a human found tempting. But all the Buddha did was say, I see you, Mara. Come, let's have tea. Rather than trying to reject or fight Mara, Buddha simply said, come in, let's have tea. So if we see our own Mara as the part or parts that try to distract us with things that don't serve us, then we can see that instead of being led by Mara or trying to suppress or ignore Mara, we can turn toward that part and say, I see you. I see you, and I make space beside me for you too. And it's when we are open to that idea that we find ourselves deep in the practice of self-love, I think. So what are the stepping stones to this place? Again, what I'm saying, it might be feeling very, very easy as you're listening to me. For you, the art or the practice of self-love might be something that you've already accessed and are able to keep accessing, even though it might have taken time to get here. Or it may be that it feels very tenuous, that connection with it. That, every now and again you feel, oh, I've nearly got it, or I have it. Oh, and now I don't. Or it might feel, you might be listening to me and going, what a load of self-indulgence. This is just selfish and not something that really has value. But I hope the fact that you are listening, if that is where you're at, that you're also willing to listen openly and listen with your heart. Because for me, this practice, this gentle, tender art of telling ourselves, I love you, is something we can do through the simplest things. And really for me, this is the practice of practical compassion. And if you've listened before, you'll be aware that that's really how I describe all of my work, is practical compassion, because it's all about finding ways we can be our own best friend, and through that we can really listen deeply to our own internal voice and find our own path through, rather than looking outside of ourselves for some other authority figure to guide us, to tell us how we should, inverted commas, be thinking, feeling, behaving. So sometimes this idea of self-compassion or self-love, it can feel so hard to access, and I'm not disputing that at all or trying to deny that at all. And I know for myself it felt incredibly difficult for most of my life. And it's a question that I'm often asked by clients is, okay, I get it, but how do I find it? And that brings me back to the book, because this inspiration that rose over the last sort of 2-3 months and really got stronger and stronger, and until one Sunday morning I woke up in bed and I had a complete vision of how the book should look and feel, and I knew exactly how to approach it and how to create it. That book is really all about answering this question of how do we find this place of practical compassion? How do we find the language and the means with which we can turn toward ourselves and say, I love you. And the book itself is called All the Ways I Tell Myself I Love You. And if you're watching on YouTube, then I'm holding it up, which obviously isn't quite so effective if you're listening on the podcast. And there really are so many ways we can practice self-love, and so often they just kind of slip past us. So we can practice it from how we wake in the morning, just taking that very first part of the day. If you hate the sound of your alarm that wakes you, what else could you use to wake more gently? And how can you turn that moment of waking each day into an act of self-love? How can you use that moment to treat yourself in the kindest way that you possibly can, just as you would treat your own dearest friend if they said to you, I really don't like that sound? You would try to find a way to make mornings easier. And so if mornings are hard, how can you make them easier? If everything feels like a rush, how would it be to spend just 5 minutes in bed really practicing being still and then establishing your intention for everything to come? How could you use those few minutes each day as a way of telling yourself, I love you, you're worthy of this moment of attention, and my whole day is worthy of this intention? And even the way that I'm publishing this book actually is part of how I tell myself I love you. So as I said, when I first wrote it, so it was a real kind of rush of inspiration. I essentially, it all happened very quickly. Once I'd had the knowledge, the kind of like, or the deep sort of belly awareness of how to do it. And I was so happy with it. And I felt that it really reflected that vision that I'd had. And it all happened so seamlessly that it didn't feel like work. And actually, I have no idea really how long it took to do it, because it just flowed. It was just a lovely time of creation. And if you've ever made anything, whether that's a painting or written a poem or planted something in your garden, and you've just noticed, or played a piece of music and you've just noticed that time has sort of done that elastic thing, then that's that feeling of flow when we're in that creative space, and it's just gorgeous. So I was really happy with it, and I knew I'd created something that really reflected something that I feel very, very, very deeply inside me. And then I sensed this slight feeling of doubt and worry as I started wondering, or rather thinking, right up here in the headspace, about how I was going to get it out into the world. And then I realised I was falling into an old trap of believing that there are rules to how things should be done. And when I noticed that, then I was able to step back from it. And I then really felt into, or felt about rather than thought about, felt about how I most wanted to do things. And when I did that, it then began to feel easy again. And that was an expression of self-love. That was noticing the discomfort and choosing to do something about it, choosing to do something different. And in fact, actually, that reminds me of one of the things that I have on my wall. This is a new one. I know I've shared some of these before, but came to me in a meditation a few weeks ago. And like so many of them, it's really rather obvious when you actually stop and think about it and write it down. But if you want something to feel easy, bring more ease. I like that one. If you want something to feel easy, bring more ease. How often do we just bring more tension, more pressure, more demands, more constraints, more rules on something? And so actually just softening back and going, okay, how can I do this differently? So I have changed the way I'm publishing my books, and I've brought them all in-house for now. So I no longer work with a publisher. So things may change again, of course. But for now, to order all the ways I tell myself I love you, or to order my darling girl as well, you will be ordering direct from me. And I've realised it's how I can ensure the process is as smooth as it can be for me, because this is about me as much as it is about you, the recipient of the book. It's important, for flow and ease to run right the way through a process. And so in the past, I might have accused myself of being too controlling. That would be a classic one I might accuse myself of. But actually, this is all about simplicity. And it feels much simpler for me now to do things this way. So it's just about you and me sharing an experience. And once I'd sort of realised that, then I was able to step back again and go, okay, so how do I want to do this? And I've decided that I'm just going to print some copies at different times each year, only for pre-orders. So there won't be any stock. And once we've gathered all the orders for each print run, we'll send her off to print and we'll get you your copies as soon as we can. So to get into this print run, actually, this is important. You need to order before the 12th of July, 2022. And if you're listening after that date, then you can check the website for the next print run details. And I'll put all the links on the show notes, or you can always just email me if you need a bit of help doing it. And delivery, here's another piece of simplicity. I'm keeping delivery to a UK address only, but if you're based outside of the UK, then please message me and we'll see what we can work out. So each of those aspects of how I've chosen to do this process is an expression of self-love, because it's recognizing how I like to work. And now how I like to work will be very different from how you like to work. And the things that I love to do will be very different from the things that you love to do. And the way in which I say to myself, I love you, will be very different from the ways in which you say to yourself, I love you. And it's all valid. And there are no rules. So the obvious question now for me to ask you is, how do you tell yourself, I love you? What are the tiny little things that you do already that express that to you? And often part of my work with my coaching clients or people who join us on retreat is helping them see what's happening. And that can include helping them see and acknowledge how their behaviour is actually shifting toward a deeper practice of self-care. Because sometimes we even find it hard to see when we are expressing love to ourselves. And I suppose in a way that's part of what the book is about too. It's about seeing that when we take time to stop and stare at a view, that's an act of self-love. Or when we take time to rest when we are tired, that is an act of self-love. Or when we allow ourselves to cry when we're feeling sad, that is an act of self-love. And there are lots of reasons why we can find it hard to acknowledge this. And it's tied up in our conditioning, in the stories that we carry, and, if you, they're familiar themes for many of us here. But I suppose the sort of simplicity really here is just being able to take a moment to step back and go, okay, how do I tell myself I love you? And you can even take a moment, a micro moment right now, and ask yourself, how can you frame or reframe what you're doing right now, right this very moment? How can you see this as an act of self-love? So gorgeous to be here with you, of course. And if you would like to pre-order your own copy of All the Ways I Tell Myself I Love You, I haven't actually really described what it is. Just realised it's a little hardback book, and it's got beautiful illustrations in it from some of the world's finest libraries. And connected with each illustration is a beautiful affirmation, a way of expressing that self-love. And they're all so simple. And the illustrations are so beautiful. There's such a lovely marriage between the two. And for me, at least, it feels like a very heart-centered, heart-created book. And I really hope that you love it too. And like I said, if you'd like to pre-order your own copy or copies and send them to people that you love, then just go onto hennyflynn.co.uk and look on the books page, and it's all super easy to order. And that's it, really. And I just want to say thank you for being here. Being here is part of how I tell myself I love you, actually, because doing these conversations with you, I know they're one way, or to an untrained eye they might look one way, but they always feel two-way to me. It always feels like you're in the room with me. So, lots of love, my darling. I send you a hug and a wave.